Marjorie Whitfield never imagined that the land she'd spent her whole life protecting would be the very thing that turned her world upside down. But it all began on a warm summer morning when she stepped outside her cabin and found three strangers standing on her property line, dressed in matching polo shirts, shiny name badges, and smug little grins like they owned the place. She didn't know it yet, but these were the people who would try to take everything from her, and they had no idea who they were messing with. The story of what happened next would spread across the town in whispers, then explode online in fury. Because when an HOA tries to steal land from an elderly woman, thinking she's too old, too quiet, and too alone to fight back, they expect submission. What they get instead is justice. Brutal, beautiful justice. It all started months earlier, long before Marjorie knew what was coming. She was 72, widowed, but sharp as ever. Her husband, Walter, had passed away the year before, and she'd been holding on to the land they'd cared for together, a breathtaking 10-acre stretch of woods and open field that bordered the expanding Highland Crest subdivision. The land wasn't just property to her. It was history, memory, legacy. It was the place where she and Walter built their lives, raised their kids, planted trees, and buried a time capsule they'd promised to dig up on their 50th anniversary. They never made it to that milestone, but the land remained. To the newly formed Highland Crest HOA, though, Marjorie's land was something else entirely. A perfect expansion opportunity. The HOA president, Douglas Merritt, was a man who believed rules mattered more than people. His entire personality revolved around feeling important. He wore sunglasses indoors, drove a luxury SUV he couldn't afford, and strutted around the neighborhood like a mall cop with a god complex. When developers approached him about adding a recreational nature reserve to increase property values, Douglas saw only dollar signs. The problem? The land they wanted wasn't theirs. It was Marjorie's. But instead of negotiating, instead of asking, instead of being human, they chose the coward's path. They tried to take it. Marjorie first noticed things were off when she received a letter in the mail, a formal notice from the HOA informing her that her land was now subject to rezoning considerations and that community access pathways were being evaluated for installation. At first, she was confused. She wasn't even part of the HOA. Her land predated the subdivision by decades. She drove down to their office the next morning, still polite, still calm, carrying the letter in her hand. She expected a simple misunderstanding. Instead, she was greeted with cold eyes and clipped responses. Douglas glanced at the letter and shrugged. "We're in the early planning stages. The community board has voted to incorporate your land into the Highland Crest boundary." "You can't just incorporate my land," she said, laughing a little, because surely he was joking. But Douglas didn't laugh. "It's for the greater good of the community. We assume you'll cooperate." She walked out that day uneasy, but still hopeful reason would prevail. After all, people couldn't really be that bold, right? She was wrong. Within days, surveyors began showing up, wandering across her property with measuring equipment and clipboards like they belonged there. She told them to leave. They said they were authorized. She called the county. The county told her no such authorization existed. Then came the construction signs. Stakes in the ground, pink flags marking future walking trails, spray paint on the grass. Her grass. Marjorie marched back to the HOA office again, this time firm, voice steady, but unmistakably angry. And there he was, Douglas, spinning in his office chair like a villain from a low-budget TV show. "You're trespassing," she said. "No," he replied, smiling. "We're preparing for integration." "You have no right." "Oh, but we do. You might want to check your husband's old deed. Land boundaries can be tricky." The implication was clear. They planned to steal it by manipulating paperwork. That night, Marjorie sat alone at her kitchen table, the deeds spread out under the warm light of her old lamp. Her hands trembled, not from age but fury. She reread Walter's notes, the signatures, the surveys. Everything was legal, everything was correct. And the more she studied it, the more determined she became. They wanted a fight, they'd get one. But Marjorie wasn't reckless. She didn't start screaming at neighbors or posting online. Instead, she began quietly gathering everything. Documents, old boundary maps, receipts, photos, even her husband's letters referencing the land. She spoke with an attorney her daughter recommended, who confirmed her worst fear. The HOA was planning to file a land claim based on community benefit, hoping she'd be too overwhelmed to respond in time. They underestimated her. She hired a private land surveyor, she contacted the county commissioner, she filed a formal complaint. Then she waited, knowing the storm was coming. And it did. The HOA served her with a notice demanding that she vacate unauthorized structures, her own barn. They claimed it violated community aesthetic standards. They fined her for excess grass height. They tried to bully her into submission with threats, letters, fees, and intimidation. But every time she responded with something they didn't expect. Documentation, legal knowledge, quiet, unshakable strength. And then came the day everything changed. A construction crew arrived, bulldozers and trucks humming like they already owned the place. They began digging near her tree line, chewing into the earth. Marjorie walked straight towards them, shoulders back, eyes blazing. The foreman hopped out, annoyed. "You can't be here, ma'am. We've got HOA authorization." "No, you don't," she said. She pulled out a bright blue folder and handed him official paperwork from the county, a cease and desist order confirming the HOA's actions were illegal. The foreman blinked, stunned. Then he told his workers to shut down the machines. From across the field, Douglas stormed towards her, face red, breath heavy, shouting about disruption of community progress. But Marjorie didn't shout back. She simply handed him a copy of the county ruling. He snatched it, scanned it, and paled. The HOA's entire plan had just been dismantled. And she wasn't done. The next week, an urgent county hearing was held. The HOA expected her to come alone. She didn't. Her attorney was there. The private surveyor was there. The county commissioner who had personally reviewed her documentation was there. Even several residents, tired of the HOA's bullying, showed up quietly in the back. Douglas tried to argue. He tried to twist facts. He tried to claim the land was communal by tradition, even though Highland Crest was younger than Marjorie's tomatoes. And then in one devastating moment, Marjorie's attorney dropped the final blow. The original deed. Signed, sealed, legally flawless, undisputable. The room fell silent. Douglas's face turned the color of wet cement. The HOA's entire plan had just been dismantled. And she wasn't done. The next week, an emergency county hearing was held. The HOA expected her to come alone, but she didn't. Her attorney was there, the private surveyor was there, the county commissioner who had personally reviewed her documentation was there. Even several residents, tired of the HOA's bullying, showed up quietly in the back. Douglas tried to argue. He tried to twist facts. He tried to claim the land was communal by tradition, even though Highland Crest was younger than Marjorie's tomatoes. And then in one devastating moment, Marjorie's attorney dropped the final blow. The original deed, signed, sealed, legally flawless. The HOA was not only denied, but penalized. Fines, sanctions, orders to compensate her for damages, and a warning that any further interference would result in legal action. Douglas was removed as HOA president within the month. 3 board members resigned. Developers pulled out entirely. And Highland Crest? Property values dropped, not because of Marjorie, but because people finally learned what the HOA had tried to do. Meanwhile, Marjorie didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She went home, walked out to the field, stood at the tree line where the bulldozers had stopped, and for the first time in months, she breathed freely. She planted a new oak tree that afternoon, Walter's favorite. The soil was soft, the air warm, the world finally quiet again. She had protected her land, protected their legacy, protected the life they'd built together. And when people later asked her how she'd beaten an entire HOA, she always gave the same simple answer. I didn't fight them. I just stood my ground. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes revenge isn't dramatic. Sometimes the most powerful victory comes from refusing to be pushed off what is rightfully yours, no matter how many people try to take it. And Marjorie Whitfield showed her whole town and the world watching online that even the smallest, quietest person can bring
a corrupt system to its knees, if she stands firmly enough.